Today's episode is about how much it costs to run a boat. Since I don't have a large swath of data to go through, basically we're using our own boating experience as an example. I'm standing in one of my favorite rooms to be in when it's not boating season because this is where I keep all my boating stuff, my little closet in the basement. Here you can see my sails that are arrayed behind me. There's other stuff you can't see, lots of little boxes and knickknacks and whatnot. So the first thing I want to mention is my boat has sails. It's a sailboat. So we run with two sails. Main sail right here. I'm showing you a little wear. And main head sail. The primary head sail, which is a Genoa. So you might say to yourself, these sort of things are expensive, and they are. For example, to replace this main sail new, to get a new one would be like $1,500. To get this head sail for a boat new would be like $2,500. Now, there's also opportunities to buy used sails at times. This spinnaker I had bought used. It was for my previous boat. It's a colorful thing. It costs about $300 in a consignment shop, quote unquote, online for sales. And when I get a spinnaker for my new boat, I will do the same thing because I want to see if I'm going to use it and enjoy it before I go spending the money on a sail of that size, because that sail would be over $2,000 to get new. So you might say to yourself, well, I'll never get a sailboat because spending all that money on sails is just crazy. Well, and yes, maybe it is crazy, but balance that with the fact that we move the boat. The boat is moving about 40 days a season. We sail from end of May till October, every weekend, and then vacation. So about 40 days a season we're moving. And a day we move, we go anywhere from between 10 and 45 miles. And with that, think about the fact that we spent $112 for fuel for the entire year. That was a big year for us too. The year before, it was around $65. So even though it's a lot of money up front for sails, we're not buying a lot of fuel. Now, I don't know what it would cost to move a motorboat that kind of distance in gallons, and how much that would cost. But I would bet that it probably rivals this or exceeds it. Anyway, I'm not trying to sell you on sailboating because sailboating is not for everyone. I understand that. Some people like the motorboat way of doing things, and that's fine. This video is not to convince you that you want to go sailing. It's that you may want to go boating. So let's talk about the capital expense for a boat, buying the boat itself. Prices for boats are all over the place, and I really mean that. For example, the boat I'm using, when it was sold new back in 1989, it sold for $160-something thousand. I'm not interested in paying that kind of money for anything except the house I'm living in. Now, on the other end of the extreme, the last boat I had, the one I use this sail with, I bought it off eBay for $600. Now, I'm not recommending anybody do that. I did that because I needed a boat for a short period of time. I bought it on eBay for $600, sailed it for the summer, and I sold it on eBay for less than that. So it wasn't an investment. It was, I wanted the utility of the boat during that period of time because I was selling my primary boat in preparation for buying my next boat. So the boat I just bought, I paid $27,000 for. The boat, or boats like that are in good condition, go for around somewhere between $50,000 to $75,000. We got this particular boat because it needed a lot of work in the interior. The hull was solid, the rigging is solid, a lot of the boat was in fine shape, the sails are in fine shape. Well, main sail's a little ragged, but the head sails are fairly new. The problems with the boat are all plumbing, wiring, woodwork, things like that. And it lacks some modern crucial electronics, that sort of thing I don't leave home without, but many people don't need. So finding a boat for yourselves, one mistake that people make is they go get a cat, look in a boating magazine, think that, oh, I'd like a boat of this certain size, and then go to a dealership and look at new boats. Now, if you're an experienced boater and you have the money, that's great to buy a new boat. If you're learning about boating, you don't want to spend all this money on your baby, as a first boat, and while you're learning, you bump the dock a few times, put some gouges in the side, and it's not going to feel good. Plus, you spend a lot of money on this boat. You might want to start with a used boat, something decent. You want to make sure you get a size that's going to work for you. Now, choosing the size of a boat there are many things to consider. One is, where are you going to keep it? What are you going to do with it? Who are you bringing with you, if anybody? What's the main purpose of it? Some people like to fish. Some people like to fish in lakes. Some people like to fish in the ocean. If you're planning on fishing in a lake, a 30-foot boat is probably not a great thing. You probably want something you can throw on a trailer, unless you're going to a very big lake and you're going to stay there for the season with the boat. Don't be tempted to buy something bigger than you think you can handle or use. Start with something that's going to fit your intended use, not be too big. You can always upgrade your boat later. It's not like a house where you have to really be careful and cognizant of all the ramifications of moving to a new house. It's a boat. It's a thing. It's something not to get too emotionally attached to. It is for your use and pleasure. There are a lot of good used boats around for the price of a decent car. You don't need to spend $100,000 to get out on the water. And if you're new at it, you definitely don't want to spend that kind of money to get out on the water. You can find a quality used boat for half or less of that. The last boat I had was sold for $25,000. It was a 26-foot cat boat. It had an inboard engine. It was in good shape, and it was made in the 80s, mid-80s. So now that you're thinking about a particular size and type of boat you might want, some considerations you have to think about for the budget are, where are you going to keep it during the off-season, and where are you going to keep it during the season. So off-season, if it's small enough to fit on a trailer, and if you have a spot for it, you can put it in your yard. That is the cheapest way to store it. You can also store boats on trailers in places that do storage as a business, inside and outside. There's also boat yards that will take boats on trailers for storage, both inside and outside. If your boat's of a certain size where trailer is not feasible, then you're looking at storage in a boat yard or having your boat trucked somewhere. More common is storage in a boat yard. So to give an example of how much that costs, for my 26-foot boat, when I had that, I was storing it for around $700 a winter, and that was with the mast staying on. All they were doing was pulling the boat out of the water. They would power wash the bottom, put it up on stands, nice and secure, and then in the spring they pick it up again and put it back in the water. That's like the bare minimum of storage for that size boat. You can also have to pay sometimes for taking the mast off when you want to do repairs or rewiring in the mast, but you don't have to do that every year in most places. Now, during the season, when you want to use your boat, you need to keep the boat somewhere where you can have access to it. So something fairly near to you or within the radius you're willing to drive. If it's a small boat, sometimes they keep them on racks and they use giant forklifts and pull them out when you want to use them. Some people pay for docks to stay at for the summer, and some people stay on moorings. And a mooring is basically nothing more than a giant anchor with a chain coming up to a ball, and the ball stays there as you go and use your boat, and you come back to that ball, you hook up to that ball again, that big float, and then you take your little rowboat to shore. In the summers, we keep our boat in a place called North Cove in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, which is off the Connecticut River. It is a very sheltered harbor. It is off the river, near the river mouth, so it's not a long trip to get to Long Island Sound, which is where we do most of our boating. It is a very good deal financially. We pay the town of Sailboat between $300 and $400 a year to have a mooring in North Cove. The town is responsible for the placement and removal of the moorings each season. We are responsible for the storage and maintenance of our own moorings. It is an exceptional deal. Docks in our area for our size boat, which is a 38, can run up to as high as $9,000 a season, which is something that right now I'm just not willing to pay. There are cheaper places around. $9,000 is a high end of the scale, but a dock for a 38-foot boat is going to run in the thousands of dollars unless you know somebody or a special deal somewhere that I don't know about. So anyway, yeah. Now let's talk a little bit about cruising expenses. Cruising is taking your boat from the place you keep it in the summertime to somewhere else. So for example, one of my favorite places to go is this island off the coast of Rhode Island called Block Island. Block Island has a beautiful harbor. You can go in there and you can drop anchor and take your rowboat ashore and walk the beaches, go to the town, the stores, anything you want to do, restaurants. And in this scenario, we've used an anchor, so we're not paying any expenses for the keeping the boat in the harbor. So they also have moorings there, public moorings provided by the town that the town manages through their local harbor master. They do a really nice job at organizing the use of these moorings. So it's first come, first serve, and it costs around somewhere around $50 a night, I believe, which is a pretty good deal for a place like Block Island. Block Island has a reputation for getting really windy in the harbor, and I like being on the mooring. I'm willing to spend the $50 to be on a mooring if I can get one, so I can go ashore and go to a restaurant or something without having to worry about the boat on its anchor and maybe slipping or moving, or someone else on anchor slipping and moving into my boat. Never like that. So a third option is staying at what's called a transient dock or a transient slip. It's basically a dock at a marina where they rent it by the night or the 2 night or some small portion of time. So in a place like Block Island, that could run you $150 to $200 a night on season. It's transient slips are something that cost very different amounts depending upon where you are. Other parts of the country, it's a lot less than that. My part of the country, and then also like in places like LA, and then places like the Keys in Florida, they're very expensive places to rent a dock. Depending upon where you are in the country or the world, your prices could be wildly different. And that's kind of true about everything I'm saying, except for the cost of sales. That's pretty constant. Now I want to talk about events. Events are things like races or rendezvous. Usually it entails some of the same thing. People are going from the area and they're all gathering in one spot to do something. In the case of a rendezvous, they get together and they have a social gathering. In the case of a race, they come in the morning, have a race around the buoys or around wherever the course is, then they get together for a social gathering. So in the case of a race, there's usually a fee for the race. In my area, for a small around the marks race, the fees are somewhere from $25 to $55 for a single day event. And then usually the reception afterwards, an optional expense. Some places don't even charge at all for that, and some do, and by the person. But it's a good activity for meeting people who have a similar interest, because being a wallflower most of my life, I found that if I am standing in a room full of people who all love boats, I can then talk about my favorite topic, which is boats, and we always have something to talk about. We don't have to talk about anything else, just boats. I suppose in a rendezvous, the conversation might be a little tougher, because if you're spending all day together socializing, eventually you have to talk about something else besides boat, at least at some point. And so maybe I wouldn't do as well on those. Okay, now expenses due to maintenance. Maintenance is a hard one to nail down because depending upon the age of your boat, how much you use your boat, size, type, the maintenance costs can be all over the place. So I'm just going to use myself for an example. Every boat, including ours, we have an engine. It's a 35 horsepower diesel engine. Has maintenance items on it, you know, belts, hoses, impellers, oil change, filters, etc. That's the same for pretty much any boat you're going to get. You're going to be doing it by the engine. A power boat with twin engines, just double it. Also, there's a lot of other items that have wear and tear. If he has fenders on the boat, dock lines, these are common to all boats. Internal systems like refrigeration, lights, batteries, and stuff, all these things will have problems at some point. You know, batteries should last you 5 years or more, depending upon the kind of battery. I have killed some prematurely, not knowing how to match my batteries to my chargers. So, now items specific to a sailboat, and back to sails, you can last a long time on a set of sails. People that race seriously, they're replacing sails that they use often. They're replacing them every year or two. Cruisers don't have to replace their sails nearly as often. The last boat I had, I went 7 years without changing a sail. This boat, I don't know yet. As I said, the head sails are in good shape. The main sails looking a little worn, but it has some life left in it, and I could do some repair work on it to extend it. And the more you baby your stuff, you know, keep it covered when you're not using it, to keep the sun's rays off it, because it'll deteriorate the stitching over time. So as long as you're good to your stuff, it lasts longer. Another consideration for a sailboat is something called the standing rigging. You've seen masts on boats, I'm sure, and then there are these cables that go up from the boat, from the edges of the boat, front, back, sides, up to the mast to keep that mast vertical. It attaches at several points, and the whole idea is to keep that mast vertical or perpendicular to the deck of the boat. Those go bad depending upon the quality and the place you are boating. They can last a long time if they're good stuff and taken care of. My rigging is about 25 years old, and I'm going to need to replace it, and I've scheduled that for next year, or next winter, I should say. That's going to cost about $5,000. But someone who's down south, where the boating season is year-round, and they're using their boat all the time, you know, they might get a lot less time out of their rigging. It also depends on the quality when it was bought. Other things that wear out and need maintenance is the safety equipment. We have fire extinguishers. On my size boat, I need 3. They need to be kept properly charged, stored, and inspected. There are flotation devices, life jackets, the inflatable kinds we talked about last time. They have maintenance that's done every year. The inflatable life jackets, the cost for that cylinder and the little button I talked about that automatically activated it, that's like $40. So that's on top of the cost of the thing. Every year or two, you're spending another $40 per jacket on that. There are flares, which have a life expectancy. There'll be a date on those for when you have to replace them. First aid kit supplies, first aid kits, anything that related to safety that wears out. The tethers for the harnesses, they have a lifespan too. You know, the less you use them, the longer they last. But they do have a doubled up stitching on it, and when the stitching will pull out and straighten out a piece of the tether. The tether's not broken. It's just showing how much stress was put on the tether. And when that's exceeded, you have to replace the tether. And when it starts to show signs of age, if it's starting to unravel on the edges or something because you had it 10 years and never replaced it, then you need to replace it. Now for cruising people, besides the cost of fuel for the engine in a boat, you have cooking fuel. My boat uses propane. Different boats have different systems. Propane is very popular, but they don't all use propane. So at the end of the boating season, for us northerners, the boat has to be winterized and covered when it is stored. Winterization for us is basically the engine, putting antifreeze in places that you can't get the water out of, like the water tanks in the bottoms and the plumbing lines. We run this non-toxic antifreeze through the water system, so it goes into the water heater, through all the plumbing, into all the fixtures, into the tanks, into the toilet, and the holding tank system. That all has to be kept from freezing because, believe me, you don't want to come to your boat in the spring and find your holding tank is busted open. The bilge, which is an area in the bottom of the boat, kind of like where water collects and is pumped out of, again, put antifreeze in there, of course non-toxic, antifreeze in there so that if any water comes in through leaks in the deck or cover or anything and it collects in the bottom of the boat, it's not just water there, it is now water mixed with antifreeze. Now covering the boat. Myself, I would buy a couple of tarps to use over the boat. 2 of them would cover the boat nicely, and I had a wooden frame I built to give it a little bit of a slope, so when snow fell on it, it would slide off. I would replace the tarps every couple of years because they'd only last a couple of seasons. They would get torn up. The wind action against the wood or against the railings, eventually holes would start to appear in it, and they were inexpensive tarps. So there's the expense of that for covering. Some people go with custom covers. The benefit of custom covers is that usually they're reinforced in the areas that need reinforcing, so you don't get lots of holes in them like you do just using standard tarps. Also, they custom fit the boat so that it would go around any stanchions or protrusions from the deck so that you could get a nice covering for your surfaces without having to do a lot of folding and pulling and bending like you would with just standard square tarps that don't really fit anything. And then these custom covers, because they're made to fit the boat and they have reinforcements in the right places, they last a lot longer. I was replacing my tarps every 2 seasons. People that I've talked to that have used the custom covers usually get 8 to 15 years out of them. They're a lot more money, but they pay off in the long run. They're also easy to take on and take off, so that it's a less of an ordeal to do the covering and uncovering. Oh, and covers for a boat my size, custom covers that is, would run somewhere around $2,000, $2,500. So that's everything I had on my list that I want to talk about. I'm sure I've missed things, I've overlooked things. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section and I will address them in a future video. And I hope someone found this informative. I'm done talking. Bye. So for people that have watched my previous videos, you may have noticed already that this is probably my favorite sweatshirt. My favorite sweatshirt for now. I like the collar. It's good to put a jacket against it. Anyway, that's apropos of nothing. Just felt like saying it. If you thought this was the least bit informative, please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you.